We talk about some controversy in the messages of some YA novels, whether it's shaming of certain types of stereotypes, whether it's wanting the quote strong female character, which sometimes has a negative connotation because why should we make someone strong and someone weak? Can we talk about some of the controversies and how to work around them?
Well, there have been a lot of controversies, and this is something I feel strongly about, and I see it a lot, where about needing more diversity and diversity of characters in all fiction, not only young adult fiction. And so when I set out to write my book, it was really important to me that my cast of characters be highly diverse, because when I look at things like Hunger Games or Divergent or any of these, and you can call up all the billboards, Twilight, it's mostly white characters, you know, and I think that that to me is not realistic for the future, but not realistic even for now, you know, and I think it's really incumbent on us as writers to really feature characters from different backgrounds and that look different ways. I do think having strong female characters, which is a really exciting trope of YA, is exciting. The reason why I think you see it so much in young adult fiction is because women write young adult fiction way more than men. It is a genre that's highly dominated by female authors. So I think that that's why you see so many great, strong women characters in these books versus any other genres. And that's also why the films then end up, because, you know, Hollywood makes very few films that star women. I would say almost all of the ones that they do make these days are adapted from books that were written by women. So that can be anything from Gone Girl to Hunger Games to Divergent, any of these, and that's why. So that's again why I think it's really important to see that diversity and that sensitivity.
Can you talk about the moral implications of what someone writes, even though someone may want to write and show a protagonist in the correct light, quote unquote, there's still stories of let's take The Diary of a Teenage Girl, which was a novel by Phoebe Glockner. And although there are things in the book and in the film that are not maybe what every parent would want their daughter to be doing, it's very true of a teenage girl, especially in that time period. It was like the 70s or whatever, Bay Area, so totally different world. So can we talk about writing with that hanging over your head, but also wanting to keep true to what's going on in either the world now or that world?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to be authentic, and I think even at the risk of being controversial, I'm a big believer in that. And I think, you know, if you're trying to, you know, do something for a reason because you're worried about it, you know, violating someone else's moral standards, I think that you're probably not in a great place with what you're writing. I think it really, you know, adhering to truth and authenticity is really important. That doesn't mean that you have to go so dark or so into something, but you know, there are a lot of kids. We have to remember teens deal with a lot of really serious things. They deal with drugs, they deal with suicide, they deal with sex, they deal with all these things. To ignore that, I think, does a disservice. Now that said, like, I don't think, you know, if your book really isn't about that, like, you know, my books are kind of these big adventure science fiction books. Like, if I started to throw in like a drug use plot line that wasn't applicable to my world, it would feel forced. So I think, you know, it just really depends on what your narrative is about, because I also don't like tacking on of like, oh, here's a random gay character, let me just put them in, because, you know, it's like, I don't like it when it feels like forced or tacked on, but it is possible. My best friend from high school is Robin Talley, and she writes queer YA fiction. That is what she does. She's amazing at it. All of her books do feature queer characters, and I love reading them, and I think it's really important because part of why she writes them is because if they had been around when we were in high school, it might have changed her life. So I think it's really, really important to have that diversity in the genre.
I was reading something on CNN, just quickly doing research for our interview, and it was just the evolution of YA and you know, how the 80s was one thing, and then the 90s, you know, and then of course now we've lived through Columbine, 9/11, and now teen pregnancy, drug abuse, bullying, all that is all much more prevalent than maybe Judy Blume's era.
Yeah.
And so incorporating that and making it more adult has been, I guess, a struggle in sort of walking that fine line. How much is too adult, which may turn off some parents,
right,
and how much is not enough that'll turn off the readership.
Yeah, I mean, from what I know and from what I know other authors are writing, I think they are tackling all of these things, and I don't think they're holding back from dealing with them in all their implications, and I think that that is fantastic. I think the nice thing when you write things like what I do, which is sci-fi and fantasy, is using more allegorical approach to explore these issues. So for example, in one of my colonies, they do have arranged marriage, more or less. It's my military society, where they're basically told who they're betrothed to and then sent to a clinic where they're supposed to procreate. And so, right, so that's like, but it is a way to look at like what are the implications of, you know, arranged marriage, what are the implications of sex, and this is in a different world. And so it exists in my book, and so maybe that brings up some interesting questions. So it makes you think about kind of the way our society is arranged. So that's the nice thing about writing science fiction, is you can kind of look at it from a different angle. That said, in terms of parents and censorship, you know, I just tend not to worry so much about that, and I think a lot of authors really kind of don't. I mean, maybe there are some, and I have seen lists like clean YA that go around where there's no cussing or sex or anything.
Sounds boring.
Sorry. I know, it totally does. And I think, you know, teens are pretty sophisticated these days, and like they're getting the content no matter what, right? Just between what's on the internet, what's on television. So, you know, in my mind, I'd rather them even just be reading it, you know? And I think most authors I know are writing stories to be responsible and to communicate something about experiences. You know, and let's just say you are a teen that had, like my friend's book, who had a parent who did commit suicide, and here's a book that is detailing that kind of experience. Like, wouldn't you want to have that available to read? It makes you, you know, to make you feel less alone. Or like my friend Robin, who writes books with featuring gay characters. Like, wow, isn't that much more relatable if you're in high school struggling with your identity and struggling with trying to tell your friends and family, like, and then you read something that makes you feel less alone in the world. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, just driving around LA, you can see any number of bus bench ads where we won't mention the name of the company, but they're quite risque, and you see that is just part of the culture now, you know, and
I think it always has been. I think maybe that was more censored at a certain point in time, but I mean, like, any bad word, believe me, a teenager has heard it and probably might be using it. Like, I mean, to think that they live in a bubble where they're not exposed to things, I think is a fallacy. I mean, obviously within a certain age range, but yeah, and if they're not hearing it from TV, they're hearing it at school. And I don't think it's that possible to control all of that. So, you know, I think a lot of it is just teaching about, you know, responsibility and about, you know, the proper context for things. But, you know, yeah, I don't see it as an issue with YA. I think it's great that they're tackling so many hard-hitting issues.